looks like we're streaming. Okay, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I'll call the Crow Wing County budget meeting for December 10th, 2020 to order. And the first order of business today is the CARES Act Coronavirus Relief Fund update. Nick, if you'll lead us through that.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. We submitted our final report to the state for CARES Act and coronavirus relief funds yesterday, utilizing just over $9 million. Of that, $5.892 million went in the form of grants, with $1.486 million for broadband, $2.887 for for-profit grants, $790,000 for nonprofit grants, and $727,000 to schools and child care facilities. The remaining portion of that was about $3.2 million. That was captured with our expenses. We had a little over $1 million in COVID-related expenses, and then we captured the remaining portion with $2.38 million in staffing under the presumptive eligibility for public safety. So that allowed us to utilize all $9 million that we got, which is a combination of what we received, just over $8 million, and what the cities and townships sent back to us. They sent just over $1 million to the county, either for the grant participation or in unspent funds. Hopefully, this is our last update with it because we did submit our final, so that's where we stand with that. Any questions on it?
So those payments have gone out, is that correct?
Yes, the for-profit and nonprofit grant checks did go out last Friday.
Okay, and so we delivered about 2/3 of those dollars to the public, nonprofit, for-profit entities out there. So I would like to take the opportunity to thank the commissioners that were involved in this, Commissioner Coring, Commissioner Brecken, Commissioner Franzine, and myself, the Bladek group led by Tyler and his staff, and Kim Rollins at United Way and her staff, and the communities that pooled their money with us to get those dollars back into the community and working for the businesses that and the nonprofits that are out there. I think it was a yeoman's effort on behalf of all of those entities, the staff in our organization, Debbie and her staff, and Nick, your group, to get that done, particularly for your group during the election process also, but that short window of time that was provided by the federal government to get those dollars out there, I think everyone did an excellent job of doing that. So I want to take this time to thank everyone for their efforts and getting those dollars out there. I know that it made a big impact on some of those businesses, and I think on Tuesday we'll hear from Tyler and some of the impacts that it has made on their lives. So thank you very much, everyone.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Would this be something, I mean, to me, this is a huge, in what the county has done here. There's a lot of discussion going on now with the stimulus again from state and federal. Is this something that maybe there should be some kind of a press release stating what has gotten back into the community and how this funds were done?
Administrator Houle.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brecken, we're working on one right now. And we want to break that down not only into the types of businesses that we funded, so restaurants, bars, how many of those got funded. We'll also break it down by the communities so that we have an understanding of how broadly it went out into the community. But we are working on that press release as we speak.
Very good.
I noted at the HRA meeting, the Crow Wing County, on Tuesday night, that going forward, because our restaurants, bars, gyms, and some of the other businesses that weren't eligible during that round of coronavirus relief or CARES Act relief, that we need to make sure we're working with our state legislators. They're looking at a package that will come back and potentially help some of those businesses, and I think that we all have a responsibility to let our representatives know how important that is to those businesses. We also have the responsibility with our federal group to make a case that they get off their chairs and start doing something there, start working together to get something done from the federal level. I realize that that's more of a lift for us, but certainly at the state level, we should be contacting our state legislators and pushing for some kind of additional relief for this group that has now been closed down a second time. And knowing the margins that they work with, this would be extremely important to get done.
Yeah.
So-
Mr. Chair, too, I think that maybe we should also be, at least for the commissioners, get your radar out there and talking to different businesses. I've been talking to some businesses and accounting firms that I don't know how long it's going to take these businesses to get back on their feet in a fine, strong way. And we made some adjustments this last spring, you know, as this came down for businesses. We should just kind of be ear to the ground and see what, if there's things that maybe this spring we may having to take some action on. But at that time, we can cross those bridges later. But just to see how businesses are doing.
Anything else? Thank you, Dick. And so we'll move to item number 2, the 2021 budget.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, for the 2021 budget, we're going to start off a little bit with the 2020 year. We are anticipating fund balance build throughout the organization for 2020. Right now, we are projecting for this year about $6.7 million in fund balance build across the organization. Part of this is the approximately $2 million that we are pulling in for public safety goes against already budgeted staffing costs, so that turns into a budget or a fund balance build for us. So that helps our Fund 1. On top of that, the general fund is anticipating about $2.2 million in fund balance growth. A lot of this is due to reduced costs in the sheriff's office due to overtime costs, as well as some reduced costs in the jail. We did lose revenue, but we've offset most of that with savings in expenses this year. We haven't been able to do the same things we've done for years because of the pandemic. Highway anticipates or has a projection right now of a usage of $1.4 million. Typically that's a timing issue with reimbursement from federal or state entities. So this year they will be using $1.4 million in fund balance. Community services, we currently project to have a $3.1 million growth in fund balance. A lot of that is due to out-of-home placement and adult services costs being way down because they are not able to deliver the same services that they've had or been able to in the past. So we will potentially see some fund balance growth there as well. Capital projects, thanks to us or you electing to freeze a number of those projects, is allowing us to grow fund balance there by about $751,000. This improves our fund balance situation across the board. It still doesn't get us below or above our minimums in general fund, community services, or the CIP fund. In general fund, we anticipate being about $1 million short of the minimum balance that we have established by policy. In highway, we are positioned very well because of local option sales tax, but we will have to continue to look at their fund balance as a whole because we need to segregate out that levy portion to know if we're levying enough to cover our expenses that are outside of the local option sales tax. That will come next year. Community services will still be about $4 million short from their minimum. We do have programmed fund balance build for 2021 that will help us continue to make progress towards that minimum. And then the CIP, which we will discuss in a little while here, will still be short of the 2.2 minimum that we have in policy by about $1 million as well. But we'll discuss that one a little bit further here in a short bit. For 2021's budget, staff has been able to look at it since our preliminary. We haven't been able to really make many modifications to it. We are still recommending that 4.97% increase to $41,262,480 for our 2021 levy. A lot of this comes down to the impact from the Department of Corrections pulling their revenues or their contract. They didn't truly pull the contract, but they don't anticipate placing many inmates with us. We also are seeing drastic drops in our income from our trust fund as that's invested. And we also pulled just over $4 million out of CDs this year and put them into our money market account, which is, I believe, at a 0.01% interest rate right now. So our expected revenues from investment income are at least half, if not 60 to 70% reduced from prior years. So the intent for next Tuesday is to present more or less the preliminary budget that we presented to you back in September. Unless there's any recommendations on anything that you'd like to see different for Tuesday.
I do have one question, and maybe Administrator Houle, you could enlighten us if you know anything about this, but Enbridge has now started to build their line. Nick just referenced the reduction of overtime in the Sheriff's Department. However, with this line coming through, do we anticipate an increase? And I know some of those expenses will be reimbursable. We know that there's a lag time to get those dollars back to us. So the impact to the 2021 budget, because I'm assuming that's kind of when they'll hit our Sheriff's Department for assistance across that line. Is there any thought about how that's going to impact overtime and those expenses more for us on the short term before we get reimbursed for them?
I think that there is a risk of that. It depends on how the construction of the pipeline goes. And if the pipeline construction goes smoothly, there won't be an impact at all. If the construction of the pipeline runs into protests that require law enforcement intervention, then that could drive overtime for us. We have a relatively small portion of geography that the pipeline goes through in the northern part of the county. We're probably not at the greatest risk of that. We're also one of the larger counties that it goes through. If I were going to pick where I would protest, I'm not sure Crow Wing County is the one I would pick. But that still could drive mutual aid. And so lots of speculation here. Is it a risk? Absolutely.
Thank you. Just wanted to get that out there that, you know, there is some risk that's going to be put on our shoulders, the Sheriff's Department at some point.
Mr. Chair, as with Nick, with the money that we pulled out of the investments, and that we were kind of anticipating possibly some cash flow issues, is that part of the reason we pulled that?
Yes, and we'll discuss later on a little bit about cash flows, but the intent was we typically are running in our available cash, especially in April, May, June, and this time of year, we have a negative available cash. Because of us pulling those investments out, we actually have a positive available cash at this point. So it means that we're not tapping into restricted or committed funds in order to make payments. We're utilizing our available cash that's sitting out there, which realistically, it being tied up in the investments, we still had plenty of cash in the bank to make payments, but this puts it into a liquid position where we're able to actually spend it.
Mm-hmm. When would you anticipate that we'd be able to reinvest that money into the investments?
Depending on the outcome of this year and where the pandemic kind of takes us next year, there's still risk for us in the future with the pandemic. Costs didn't inflate as much as we expected. We collected taxes at a much higher rate than we anticipated this year. But the longer this drags out, the harder hit it takes the economy, the more risk we face.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Commissioner Brecken, we will be meeting with our investment team from Bremer Trust in the next probably first quarter of the year. We'll look at how that portfolio looks overall and see if there's any adjustments that need to be made within that. The market being what it is right now, we're not necessarily looking to make any strong changes with what our plan is. We're fairly laddered out right now to make sure that we are not very negatively impacted by these types of situations anyway. But we will be looking at that, and then we'll come up with a new strategy that we'll bring back to the board as well.
Very good, thank you.
We did just meet with Bremer, or meet, electronic now, about 2 weeks ago, and they did not see any opportunities for us to modify anything at this point. Many of our investments, particularly in the trust, are longer-term investments that were invested multiple years ago, so our rates are at a much better position in those. The maturing CDs is where our biggest risk is, because when we go to reinvest, we're locked in at today's rates, not the rates we had when we initially got that CD.
Okay. Any other questions for Nick?
Along with the 2021 budget, just to remind you that there is anticipated fund balance usage across the levy-based funds of about $700,000 for 2021, and that's a direct result of the challenges we're facing with revenues. So that will be in the presentation on Tuesday. For CIP, we collect about $1.71 million in property taxes dedicated to our capital projects plan. This is the same that we have anticipated for 2021. We also expect to get approximately $250,000 in forfeited property, which puts us at about $1.96 million in levy-based or forfeited property revenues outside of what we receive from the state. Including what we get from the state, our total revenues are about $4.661 million for capital projects. The state's portion is something that we see as a possible risk for us to have reduced or eliminated, depending on how their budget pans out over the coming years. So looking at that, with the $1.96 million, the SMT members would like to propose a new or updated CIP that keeps the budget at $1.86 million, so it stays within the realms of our current revenues that are levy-based and allows them to produce the projects that are necessary to keep the organization running. I believe Debbie has some information on that.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I did send you out a list yesterday of the projects that are being proposed for completion in 2021. The CIP Advisory Committee, which consists of the Finance Director, the Facilities Manager, the IT Manager, and the Fleet Manager, reviewed the information that was originally presented for 2021's CIP and did some scrubbing, if you will, to see what projects were still needed to be done, were priority, and did some ranking as far as what were critical projects and what were some of those things that we could either put a pin in for 1 year or defer out for a year or two to still be able to build some of the fund balance that we've been looking to do as well. So the list that is being presented to you has been reviewed from the standpoint of seeing these items as critical in nature of being accomplished in 2021. There are a number of different projects that we have either revised or have deferred. Some of those are based on we were able to get some of those things done in 2020 with some of the CARES funding or with some creative consideration of other revenue sources. And being able to make some of those adjustments let us bring down the amount that's going to be necessary in the CIP for 2021. These projects are, this list, I should say, does not allow us for any type of an emergency contingency where sometimes we are able to say, well, this project can be deferred for a year and we'll utilize that funding to deal with an emergency that comes up. Because we don't have any projects like that built into this plan, I would like you to consider also including a dollar amount that would be a contingency situation in the CIP, whether it be maybe right around that $300,000 or so that would allow for review or an approval maybe with the county administrator and myself that we would be able to authorize for an emergency expenditure. We had a situation at the jail last week where we had no heat for a couple of days until we could get that repaired. If we had something like that came up where we did not have that funding available, that would give us the opportunity to be able to do that as well. So with the projects that are being proposed, having a total price tag of 1.86, and I would like to suggest a contingency of $300,000 included in that, so it would be a total CIP of about $2.1 million for 2021, with then also, that allows us to build our fund balance by close to $2 million over the course of 2021, which is a significant increase for us.
Okay, so you're willing to take questions on the list?
Absolutely.
Okay, and I have several. I don't know if, Commissioner Coring, why don't you go first then?
Just kind of a comment. It's amazing how much money it takes to keep this operation running. I mean, air conditioners and everything. I guess just a question. I don't and maybe you don't know the answer to this, Deb, but the meals that are prepared for prisoners, are they prepared right over there, or are they brought over there? Because I noticed on the list, there's 22,000 for oven replacement. So can you just kind of explain how that works over there? I guess I don't know that.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Coring, yes, the meals are actually prepared here on site, so there is a fully functioning kitchen. And part of that is, that's the cost analysis that is done to prepare on site, to feed the prisoners on site versus preparing off site and bringing it in. There is a cost benefit analysis that has been done by the jail staff year over year as it is. And those value, it's cheaper to do it here at the jail. Correct. It is, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Coring, it is a contracted service that provides that. They provide the manpower and the supplies and materials. We provide the equipment, basically, is what the situation is.
Follow-up question to that. Do they provide any meals for outside organizations?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure. Dan Ekstad, I think, is on the line. I know at one time, the vendor that we had there was preparing some items here for other agencies. I'm not sure if that is still current with our existing vendor or if there's been any change to that. And I'm not sure if Dan has that information, but if not, we can certainly get it for you from the jail as well.
Dan, you're on the line?
Yep, I'm on the line here. I do not have any information on that. I am unaware that that we actually do prepare anything outside of the jail. But I can get back to you on that as well too. Send an email out. I'll follow up on that.
What is the name of the organization that is preparing the meals for us, for the county?
It's under a DBA. I'll look that up here, just one second.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I don't remember what the new name of the company is. It used to be Aviance, but I think it's got a different name now.
And I think you're right.
Yeah,
Allianz
it does.
has changed their name.
Yes.
Same organization.
I believe it's the same organization, but I think it just has a different operating name at this point.
And I believe that they make meals for the CBHH locally.
Right.
So my question then is, are we capturing, because they're using our equipment, which we're replacing.
Correct.
So is that captured in the contract that we have with that group?
Mr. Chair, I know when the whole original scope of the jail was first developed, and that was part of the conversation, was that that agency was going to be doing those meals for other things. That was part of that original scope and that consideration and that contract rate as well. So I know it has had a component of that built in. I would have to go back to look and see what the actual piece of that plays into it, how it is calculated, but I know it was a consideration that was figured out in their rates.
Okay, and we would be following up if they added other organizations that they were providing meals, causing additional usage of
Wear and tear situation, yes.
our space?
Yes.
All of those?
Yep.
Okay,
I know it's reviewed every time we renew the contract, so I will take a look and see what that looks like too.
okay. So I do have several questions then. Were you finished, Commissioner Coring? For now, that's all. Okay. So I have a couple questions, and this is coming from an ignorant perspective. The Cross Lake facility that we have for the organization up there, we're looking at replacing a fuel pump system up there, and some lighting requirements. Are those joint expenses with Cross Lake, the city of?
Mr. Chair, yes, the city and the county have a shared agreement, a joint agreement with that facility. And the county is responsible for 60-some% of the cost and support and maintenance of that establishment, and the city is around 30-ish, 20-some% with regard to that. The amount that is listed here is part of what I believe, and John and Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is would be the county's portion to update and maintain the actual facilities itself. There might be some bill back to the city for their portion of it, but I think this is just the county's portion. So please correct me if I'm wrong, guys. I love it when nobody
Debbie, I'll
does.
chime in here. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, John.
That's Joe.
Joe.
This is Joe.
I'm sorry, Joe. Go ahead.
That total cost for the fuel system replacement, that is the total cost that the county is going to absorb. That doesn't factor in the city of Cross Lake at all. What we're under is basically we support the fuel system at Cross Lake. We do charge extra, a 10% increase when they purchase fuel from us. So that cost goes back into the highway department system, into our fund, and that is part of maintaining and repairing that fuel system. So that 10% increase is being charged to them all throughout when they charge or they use fuel from us. So initially, I'm under the understanding that we are taking care of the fuel system completely, and the city of Cross Lake wouldn't chime in on it.
Okay. And John, then on the portion that's the lighting, you can enlighten me on that portion also.
That is for all new lighting upgrades in the facility, and that would just be a portion. They would be contributing another 40% on top of that. So, you know, another $8,000 or $10,000 would come to them to make that project happen.
Okay. Thank you. And John, while I have you on here, there's also this, and I don't know what this is, but a Jace 600 replacement. I don't know what that is. Can you tell me what that is?
Absolutely. So our HVAC controls and building automation system and all of our facilities are run by Jaces. That's the main brain for like an individual air handler, and it also communicates out into the spaces on a certain floor, as an example, to control space temperatures and fin tube radiation and airflows and all those things. So we've done upgrades across the campus over the last 7 years. We're finishing up, we're working on the jail right now to replace their HVAC system. And this fund would be to replace the last 5 remaining Jaces that are obsolete. And when I say obsolete, 1, you can't buy the ones that we have anymore. And 2, we can't do software upgrades to the ones that we currently have. So we've only taken them so far. So then we end up with different versions on our server and out in the field, and things start to get really messy.
Okay, thank you, John. And the last one for you, John, would be this shooting range roof. And, you know, when we're looking at the sort of the stress of our budget at this point, can you explain why that rises to a level of being replaced this year?
The shingles are, the granules are coming off some of the shingles. We're seeing some curling. We have not experienced any leaks in the facility yet, and I'd like to avoid that because, as we all know, once we start leaking, then we're talking about roof decking, repairs, and those kind of things. So we're kind of trying to head that off before the problem gets worse and more expensive. I originally was looking at a 10 roof for that. But I've dialed that back from that to just a 20 or 30 year shingle roof.
Okay, and I apologize, John, I do have one more in your category, the parking lot resurfacing and curbs.
So we generally have been using about $50,000 on an annual basis. The first thing we take a look at is our ADA compliance on all of our sidewalks and approaches. You know that we did the front of the historic courthouse last year, that big pad out there. There were numerous ADA violations on there. So when we have the heaving sidewalks and the heaving approaches and those kind of things, and then we get crumbling curbs, which are trip hazard, a lot of that is from our own plow damage. So instead of putting regular curbs in at certain locations, we're putting what they call drive-over curbs so they don't get damaged and they last longer. That also gives us the ability to crack seal areas that are breaking down and to do some chip sealing to maintain our lots so that we don't end up with a $1 million bill down the road trying to have to replace entire parking lots.
So which lots are we talking about, John? Are we talking about all of them around the courthouse and the judicial center and the sheriff's office?
The way we go about it is we first look at those things that might be an ADA violation. So heave sidewalks, cracks in sidewalks, those kind of things. That's our number one priority. Then we will start our plan. Chip seal will probably be this year, will just be over by the jail, mostly the north lot. $50,000 doesn't go very far when you start chip sealing the kind of surface area that we have. So, you know, we're looking at probably over a period of 5 years getting that all done.
Okay, thank you. And now you're off the hook, John. I'll move on to Jay at this point. I have one question in your category, Jay, and that is the modules, the log upgrades to the Tyler IAS World, and I know we've had issues with Tyler and that organization. Is this going to get us to where this is an effective program for us?
That's going to help a considerable lot. We went to that Tyler, 3-4 years ago, and just because of the other pressures on the technology budget, especially the jail over the last 2 years took the majority of that, so we've not been able to give Gary any money to help with those issues that we're talking about. So this would provide that funding for him to prioritize and fix some of those issues. In talking with Gary, a lot of the stuff is done by hand. They're doing recalculations and stuff. So this is to help fix the tax system, or make it better, I should say.
Mr. Chair, can I add one thing to that as well? We have been gathering in land services and in finance as well. We've got a list of items that need enhancement, if you will, in Tyler. Some of those things are things that they have never had to deal with before with any of their other systems within their other counties that they serve in IAS World. So we are doing some of that, creating the wheel, not just redesigning it, but actually creating it in the first place. So we do feel that we are well positioned to make some enhancements in that realm, and I think that 2021 will be the first opportunity that we have all the ducks in a row to make that happen and see some significant improvements in that system.
Are these enhancements, are these enhancements driven by our requests, or are they something that Tyler already has available and we just have never bought that component?
Both, I believe. There's a little bit of both. The majority of it is things that they do not currently have in their system that would require new add-on, new writing of those components. There is also a piece that is purchasing some additional modules that they already have in existence, that they've already done, that we did not start our scope with to begin with in that realm. This would be the next step to enhance. The biggest right now is that new piece that they don't even have yet.
So they'll be paying us some revenue because we are driving development in their
I
organization.
wish that's how things worked. Yeah.
That was my back thinking there.
Yeah.
Commissioner Hoag.
Thank you. My question was that none of this was stuff that was promised to us originally in the original contract.
None of this was stuff that was in the original scope of the contract.
So have we resolved those issues?
No.
So
We have not resolved all the issues that are currently existing as of yet. I think that we're getting closer. Yeah, I would say we've got a lot of the issues resolved with them, but there is still a few that are still hanging there.
okay.
So when you say, I'm sorry, go ahead, Commissioner.
There's a blur feature on your team's
Yep.
virtual backgrounds that you can make the blur. Yeah.
It's not.
I'm gonna-
We'll get you all set up with all the cool stuff you can do when you're going to.
I'm going to ask that you not help him with the backgrounds. We want to see his background when he's not in-house.
We want to see you washing dishes.
Mr. Chair, if I can go back to the jail food service for just 1 minute. The company is now Summit Food Service, is their new name. Summit Food Service is
Okay.
the name of the meal provider there.
So going back to Tyler just for a second, the issues that we have left, in the scope of all the issues we started with, are these ones that are still hanging out there of great importance, or are they gradually getting to be less and less important?
Mr. Chair, I think like with all things, they're gradually we're getting to the minute, more microscopic issues that need to be addressed. Are they any less important? No, otherwise they wouldn't be on our list of things that need to get resolved. So they are still important, and they are definitely things that we need to have resolved. But they are not impacting the ability for us to do business. It's just still requiring some more manual workarounds than what we would like to see.
Okay.
So, but it doesn't take them off the hook for
It does
any of
not take them
those-
off the hook for what they already need to
Okay.
deliver from the original
All right.
promise.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Okay,
Thank you very much. I think we should have a little bit of a discussion about Debbie's request for the additional 300,000 as an emergency fund to be attached to this.
And, Mr. Chair, may I speak to it?
Or I keep calling you Commissioner, Administrator.
Yeah, that's right. That's all right. I demote me back. That's good. Normally, we would have a CIP that is somewhere between $4 and $4.5 million. And in that size of a CIP, if we have something happen during the course of the year, we just shift it around. And you give me the authority to do that up to 50,000. This CIP is less than half of that. And so built into it is sort of a run to fail, the expectation that we will not fix everything that we know we would like to fix, and we're going to let some of it fail. And when it fails, we need the capacity to quickly move. Now, there is capacity in state law that says we can go make an emergency repair. And in the past, there have been occasions I can think of that we have done that. We've used that statutory authority. That statutory authority says we can go make the repair, but we have to report back to the county board at the next meeting. I would like to get some feedback from you about whether or not there is a contingency. I think it is a good idea this year. I don't normally, but I do think it's a good idea this year. I would suggest that you consider that Debbie would initiate, I would need to review and approve, and we would report back to the county board on any uses of the contingency fund. If you're going to,
After you used it.
yeah. And think about it, because the part failed, and you only meet every 2 weeks or sometimes every 3 weeks. And if we're going to have such a pared down CIP, I think it's a greater risk. And we're not really going to have much choice. If a pump fails and we can't get heat to a particular portion of the building, we're going to go replace the pump. And so I think having a little bit more of a planned approach to that, I think is wise. So I do think having a contingency is a decent idea, but I do know you're going to want to get reported back on exactly what happened.
Commissioner Coring. This is exercise for your
Yeah.
knee.
Is this, I guess, is this just a kind of a one-time, just for 1 year? Yeah, because I wouldn't be comfortable with it going on forward. I just feel like, I just signed my election certificate, and Deb had me recite the oath. I've got a responsibility to report back to the constituents, and I need to know what's going on here. So I'm okay. I understand the reasoning for this. I'm okay with that. I just want you to report back to us, but I don't want it to be an ongoing thing. Okay, does that make sense?
Other comments?
Did Deb?
I know that I would support that too. I think that that's important. I think the 1 year window is appropriate. So I think I'm not hearing any negativity here, so I think that that will move forward. You have consensus on that? Nick, is that the end of the?
Can I add one more thing to that, Mr. Chair?
Oh, sure.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, one thing I would suggest, or maybe we'll look at, is creating a special form for that particular purpose, so that we do have the paper trail. Like I said, if I initiate it, Tim approves it, we can then send it on to you so you can see what it is, so that we have that documentation of what that contingency was used for in that particular realm. So no pressure to Nick, but we'll create another form that we'll use to be able to track that piece for this 1 year.
Yeah, one question.
Commissioner Hoag.
Deb, maybe just a quick question and not, but how did we arrive at the 300,000?
Mr. Chair, I pulled a number out of the air. Honestly, when we talk about projects that if there is some type of an emergency need of some kind, it could be anywhere from a $5,000 part to a $150,000 overhaul to a big type of thing. I wanted to make sure that we weren't up here, because I don't like that concept of having too much being assigned to it, but also to have some type of framework around what that would
Well,
mean.
and maybe my concern is it enough? In that if we go into, you know, the weather season where we've got
Right.
some major back-to-back storms as we've had a few years back, are we going to
I
have enough to
think,
address it, or?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Hoag, I think it's enough from the standpoint that you do still meet at least every 2 weeks. So if we did have a project that was going to be more significant than that, it probably isn't something that we could accommodate in that super short window of time. We would have the opportunity to come back to you for
Okay.
that purpose and have you approve that.
Curious as to.
Yep.
I look at the, you know, the requests here, and the largest one, I think, is $270,000. So
Right.
the 300,000, I think, is appropriate from my perspective. And you always have the emergency statute that allows you to
Correct.
move monies around if you have to. So,
Right.
so I think I'm comfortable with that number myself. Okay? Does that do it for our 2021 budget?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, that does it for the CIP portion. I also wanted to bring up the second assessment district. We were asked to look at that a little bit closer and come up with a couple different options. We did pull two options here. One is the one-year recapture, where we do our 79.55% levy increase for 2021, getting us back into the range of where we were in 2018 or 2019 for the levy amount. And what the subsequent look of that was going to be. We also took and tried to split that increase over a 3-year period, keeping in mind that the costs continue to increase every year. We do have a fire contract that comes out of this. We have admin costs that come out of this, plus all the highway expenses that come out of this levy. So those costs continue to increase year over year. So the target moves as we do this. Before you on that sheet that I handed out are both options. Both do require levy increases in the out years beyond this initial impact, whether it's the 1 year or the 3 year. The 3-year recapture ends up at the end of this term through 2035, increasing the tax rate a cumulative $15,627 more than the 1-year recapture does. So there is a little more cost to the landowner if we do the 3-year recapture versus the 1 year, but it is $15,627 over the entire term that we have in front of you here. The Highway Department has graveling that occurs every 5 years. That is the main driver behind this levy having to be in the position it is. That is what drives the fund balance drastic changes, where we have in 2024 a significant drop of fund balance. In the 1 year, it's a negative $121,000. In the 3 years, it's a negative $139,000. That is the graveling contract hitting us in that given year. Extending that out typically increases our cost to do that gravel project because we have to do a lot of repairs in between to keep the road up well enough to be traveled before that major graveling event occurs. The Highway Department has found that every 5 years is the ideal for that. That road is kind of in a swampy area that requires significant upkeep. So these are the two options that we were able to present. We're able to calculate anything else that you would like to see with that. I did have Land Services look at the impact for 2021 to a homeowner. At the 79.55%, it will increase it from what the 2020 amount was by approximately $250 over a $180,000 homestead. If we do the 28.99, it is a $91 increase to that tax.
How much?
$91. Keep in mind, these are estimates. They are very rough, so it may vary. But that's the net impact for 2021. With the 3-year recapture, they continue to see that 28.99% increase for 2 more years after that. Estimates about $100 for year 2 and about $150 for year 3. And those are really real good estimates that they could change significantly by that point in time. Tax capacities can change and everything else. So those are 2 of the options that we put together. Interested in direction that you would like us to look or go?
Well, one, again, we've got this system working as far as the cycle in which we take care of the roads. We've not had any complaints, issues with the road systems for many years now. So I don't want to wander off of that. I want to keep course with what we've been doing, because I believe the people up there are comfortable with the roads and their fire protection and whatnot. But and as we discussed in the past, because there was a slip on our end and the current, conditions that we're all living in, again, to spread this out over a 3-year period, I think is going to be beneficial to many of the folks up in that area. And rather than taking a one hit in 1 year, I would support the 3-year. We're not talking a lot of dollars, and I think it'll help many people.
So Commissioner Hoag, they understand though that will cost them more money in the long run.
Yeah, but again, I didn't have time to talk to every resident in that area, but I do believe that there's many that are hurting, and I just don't. That's a big hit.
Okay, Commissioner Coring?
Mr. Chair, I guess I'm still trying to figure this out. So are we proposing, I thought we were proposing to go back to what it was. I mean, it went down, and then if it just goes back up to what it was, is that what you're proposing? I guess I didn't.
Well, I think there was three options technically.
I don't think everybody got the information that I see that you have. I didn't
One is that we make the correction this year.
get it.
The second one would be to take a year, and the third one would be to take 3 years. I think that, am I correct in that, Nick?
The 79.55% brings us back within the range of where we were in 2019's levy. So in 2019, we levied 66,657. In 2020, we levied 35,748 due to that administrative error. This brings us back up to the 66,047. So it brings us back into range with where we were in 2019's
We're
levy.
basically, to Paul's question, we're capturing that year that we lost or that we missed in this plan.
We're just bouncing back to where the trajectory was
Yeah.
prior to the administrative error.
Well, that's what I favor. I thought we had an email or something. Why did I see something else besides this? But I saw something. Huh?
I asked for the sad historical levy. That's
I
what-
think
that's the
that
only
was
thing.
emailed to us, wasn't it? Yep. Okay. So I guess I favor just going back to where it was.
Well, then we have to make up for the 30,000 that we missed, and that's what that 3-year repayment is.
The missing amount for the 30,000 that we missed this year will be recaptured in the levy increases in the outgoing years. The 78 or 79.55 just gets us back to that baseline, and then that 30,000 will have to be caught up over the course of the next 15 years to get us back to where we have a positive fund balance out there, and they aren't borrowing money to contribute or to produce their projects. The 28.99 just takes that initial impact and spreads it out over 3 years. We still have to levy in the outgoing years to get us back to that positive fund balance position.
Okay, so can I ask another question? Sure. So what was it, this is confusing to me, right, this sheet. What was the levy amount in dollars for last year? Or the lower amount?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Coring.
Oh, no, Coring.
In 2019, it was 66,657. This year, we were at 35,748.
Okay. And so what we're proposing, why don't we just go back up to the 66? Isn't that okay? And then we can feather it in?
We are, but we're also capturing the year that we missed that amount.
You have to
and
make
spreading
up
that
the
out over 3 years.
30,000.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners.
Year where they
We're not capturing it in 1 year, though.
No. Mr. Chair and Commissioners.
That's one of the options,
Okay.
which is an 80% increase to their.
So then that would be going from 30-something back to 66 and then capturing the other part that we screwed up on and then, correct?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, the 79.55 does not recapture the 30,000 that we did not levy this year.
Right.
That only gets us back on track with where we would have been if we wouldn't have made the error in 2020. So we're not recapturing anything with either one of these plans. We're not recapturing that 30,000. That will be made up over the course of the next 15 years before we get back to that point where we're at a positive cash flow. The positive fund balance originally was around 2030. This extends it by 4 years in both options.
Can you help with this?
Administrator Hool.
Mr. Chair, members, we are recapturing the amount that you lost. And think about it this way. We had a target to get the SAD to a positive fund balance, and what Nick has in front of you will get you to that positive fund balance. And so, because we were counting on that 35,000 from last year to get there, that's what Nick is telling you, it's 3 to 4 years longer under either of these two scenarios to get there. The one scenario is we're going to take the biggest bite, the largest chunk, all at once. The other scenario is we're going to take 3 smaller but still larger than normal bites to get us to that same point. But at the end, we will have a positive fund balance, which was the goal originally.
So the 29% increase includes recapturing?
In a nutshell, it does.
Over
the
3
course
years.
of that
Yeah.
long period of
All right.
time, you're going to
Yep,
end
yep.
with a positive fund balance, and that was the goal all along.
That was the intent, I think, of the options that we wanted to present, so.
Yeah.
Commissioner Coring?
Mr. Chair, so this is Commissioner Hoag's district, and I want, with all due respect to him, I want to be sensitive to that. So my question to you is, do you want it, I'll do what you want to do. Do you want to do 1 bite or 3 bites?
I'm looking to spread it out over three-year cycle.
Okay.
Rather than an 80% increase to their, we'll spread that out over 3 years. And yes, it does work out to be a little bit more money, but it's not a huge hit in
Okay.
1 year.
That worked for me.
Other commissioners? I think we're looking at a 3-year then.
Okay, that is exactly what I was just going to ask, is kind of need to have an idea of where we want to go for next Tuesday, because this will be part of our final levy and budget. So I will put it at the 28.99, and we will modify the budget accordingly. Mr. Chair and Commissioners? Oh,
Go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was ready to move on, so if you have a question on any of that.
Any other questions on the 2021 budget? We'll move on to number 3 then, which is the financial status update.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, as we discussed earlier, budgets are performing well this year. Pandemic has actually had a positive impact on our expenses. It has caused a lot of other challenges, but for expense-wise, it has been a positive for us. So in community services, in general fund, in capital projects, we did see, or anticipate seeing fund balance growth across the board. Again, we don't anticipate that we're going to be above our minimums. We'll still have to extend that
Just
plan.
hold you up 1 second.
Yep.
Commissioner Coring?
Before we move on, Mr. Chair, I guess a question to the finance director. What kind of protocols do you have in place, or are you going to put in place, that this never happens again? This cannot happen. Absolutely not. So I'd like to know what you've got in place, or what you're planning on putting in place, so that this mistake doesn't happen again.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Coring, the intent for going forward for this is that when the levy forms are filled out, which are still in a handwritten form, both myself and my senior finance analyst will review to ensure that they are accurate to what we have in the final levy presentation. And then we are asking that Land Services, when they receive this to enter, are comparing it to prior years to ensure that they are not a significant change from the prior year, so that they ask questions prior to actually entering this into their systems going forward.
So there's more than one set of eyes looking at the issue in the end?
Yep.
It's not just your department, not just Land Services, but both of you looking at the issue.
And prior to this, we were completing them, and then we would send them over to Land Services. There was miscommunication that they were not reviewing them. So we've put policies or procedures in place to make sure that both sides are reviewing these before they are completed.
Would this require us, Administrator Hool, to have a policy if this should ever occur again? I mean, this is human errors. Human errors do happen. And should we have a policy as a board to address these type of issues and what the resolution would be for those?
Well, Mr. Chair, I tend to agree with Commissioner Coring on this one. This can't happen. And so the policy is, this can't happen. We need to design processes so that it doesn't. And it is multiple sets of eyes. We had this happen once before, and it used to be that Land Services would produce the list, and we had an error. So the process improvement was, well, we're going to shift it over to finance. So now finance will generate it, send it over to Land Services. And this happened. It must be multiple sets of eyes. It has to be. It's too important. And so even if it needs to be triple checked before it happens, that's what we need to do. City of Nisswa is dealing with a little bit of an issue in that regard as well. They certified an incorrect number to us. There's still time for us to fix that error. This one was not caught in time to fix. So the policy is, it can't happen.
Can I go one step further with that too? Yes, double checking, triple checking, multiple sets of eyes, all those things are things that we've now talked about. Gary and I have also talked about how do we automate some of these things so that it does trigger, not just that there was an error, but that we can see why there was an error. This is more than just Crow Wing County, as Administrator Hool said, it also deals with the cities and townships. Sometimes when you have some new clerks who are coming in and they're not sure of what they're certifying or wanting to make sure that they have the information correct. We've talked about putting in some formatting into the simple spreadsheet that would just automatically trigger a color to turn red when the number is entered so that you make sure that, oh, why did this change so significantly? Let me do the check to find out what the story is behind it. Not just taking the numbers at face value, but making sure that we're finding out what's the rationale and the reasoning behind that as well. So yes, we're having multiple people now double check and proof it, but we're also looking at how we can change that actual physical process to alert us to dig deeper into the situation as well.
I would think in the spreadsheets, we have the ability to put the formulas in there to say that, there's a certain threshold that if it
Yes.
violates that threshold,
Yes, it turns red.
red lights it or
Yep,
whatever
might
it does,
be. Yep.
so that we know that we need to take a look at that.
Correct.
And we must not have done that in the past, but I think that
We're
that's a
going
very
to going
simple
forward.
fix for this
Right.
issue. And I think it's an important fix, so,
Yes.
good. Sorry, Nick.
Oh, no problem. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, picking up where we left off here, Highway is still in a good position for fund balance due to the local option sales tax, but as we discussed a little earlier, we will have to be reviewing their fund balances and their levy in out years to determine if they are levying the proper amount to do the roadway work that is our portion and is not covered under either local option sales tax or state aid or federal grants. So that will be something that we will be going after next year, is reviewing where that money is being spent and ensuring we have the proper amount of funding for our own internal roads that are not state aid. We're still watching and listening to information coming from the state on revenues. There's adjustments that have came from the Department of Transportation in the amount that they anticipate reducing their state aid fund by. It was over 10%. I believe they're down to 8% now. Reduction is their anticipated. But as the year continues on, this year and into next year, that is up in the air of what that actual impact will be. We can also see the same thing from other areas that we're receiving state funding, that there is that risk of reduced state funding going forward. We're trying to offset that and be planful that if that does occur, the risk is minimal to us, but it is something that we potentially will face over the coming year. We are in a better cash flow position for our available cash this year than we were last year. Last year at this time, at the end of November, we were negative $463,000 in available cash. This is just cash that is not restricted or committed by statute, what is actually physically available for spending within the departments. This year, at the end of November, we had $4.894 million in available cash. That is due to us withdrawing those CDs. We pulled about $4.518 million in CDs and moved them to our money market account, which gives us that liquid ability to move that cash and use it. Our money market account is more or less a savings account for us. It is something we can easily transfer back and forth to our actual checking portion, but it does earn us a little bit of interest, and it is now a little bit of interest. Prior to the last 8 months, 9 months, we would be around 1%. We're down to almost 0 at this point. Outside of that, that is what I have for the financial status update.
One of the things I would like to see going forward, Nick, and this is just me personally, I don't know if the other commissioners feel that it's necessary information, but you talk about the highway department and looking at some of those salaries and where they should be on the levy rather than on relying on other sources to pay. I would like to see that done for land services. And community services, I know they deal with a lot of grants and that, but I'd like to just have that comparison for community services, how much is actually being paid by some other means, and the portion that is paid by our levy. I would just like to see that at some point.
And I believe we should be
No
able to
pressure
pull
to
that.
have it done tomorrow, but if you could have it done by Friday, that'd be fine.
Oh, okay.
Or, I'm sorry, Saturday. No, but no pressure, just down the road somewhere, I would like to see that analysis.
Yeah, and I'll let the business managers know. Most of them, I believe, are on right now, so we'll make sure that they start
My
keeping
concern
that
is
as a
the
path.
volatile revenue streams that they're relying on to pay some of those salaries versus the levy.
We can do that. So that moves us into additional business. Is there anything?
So with that, we'll move on to the additional business. Anything further? Commissioner Coring? We're going to have to allow you more time just to get to
Yeah,
the
you're going to have to
microphone.
allow me more time. Just a question that I have for the county board. I think I know the answer to this question, but, you know, as your representative on the airport commission, we have had, they are not on pay for performance out at the airport. We've had a couple meetings of discussions if that's the direction that we should go out there. Well, obviously, that's the direction we've went here. So I'm assuming that, as your representative, I'm assuming that you would want me to advocate that position out at the airport commission too. I guess I'd like to have your feedback if that's what you want, because there's a little bit of a pushback out there that they just, don't like it and don't think it's the right thing.
How many employees do they have, Commissioner?
5, 6.
5? 6, that's counting Mr. Wright
Yeah.
and his secretary?
Yeah.
Okay.
What system do they use?
It's just the kind of the
That's
step,
the step.
kind of the step and cola, you know, just like the old days, you know. And it's just, you know, I've tried to explain how it isn't a fair system. You know, it kind of, I always tell people when I'm explaining it over at Oak Lawn Tavern, that, you know, you've got Tim Hool sitting here and Paul Coring's here. Tim Hool is doing, processing 10 applications a day, and I'm processing 20 applications a day, and I can see what he's doing, and pretty soon, and then when it comes time for a raise, he gets the same raise I do. Now, how is that fair? And then pretty soon what happens is I say to myself, well, why am I working so hard? And then pretty soon it goes where I'm down to 10, but I get the same pay. What difference does it make? I just think that there should be an incentive that if somebody is going above and beyond, they need to be rewarded. And if somebody doesn't want to work as hard, they're not rewarded as much. I don't know, it just makes total sense. But I don't know that they really understand. There's pushback. And so I guess I'd like to have some feedback from the county board.
Have you spoken with the Brainerd representative?
Yes, Mr. Stunek, Councilman Stunek, is also in favor of it because they're going that direction for the city too. So, I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I personally think you should be advocating for that. I
Okay.
think that's the right direction to go. I don't know what,
Yep, I would support
Who
you on that
would
too.
ultimately make that decision? I
We
guess?
do, the airport commission does.
Oh,
With negotiations, you know, if that's the position that we go into, labor negotiations.
would that have to be approved by either the city or the
No.
county?
No.
So the commission,
Air-
okay.
Commission does.
I think you have your direction.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. Any other? Administrator Hool.
I have heard that the state may have reached some agreement on economic assistance grants. There may be a county role to play. I'll dig into that a little bit more today and try to give you guys an update about what that's going to look like. It appears as if there will be a county role. I just don't know what scope. Given what's occurring here, I also just want to put on your radar to think about, we did a property tax abatement of penalty in the spring. We did not do that for the fall collection. Do you think we should be considering it for next spring? We also have liquor licenses and tobacco license that are coming, but that's not till next June. So we can cross that bridge when we come to it. But, I think that's what Commissioner Brecken's point was about, keep your ears to the ground for who's hurting out there and the degree to which we need to think about whether or not we can help. Okay?
I
And I
believe we
think-
need to.
I think that's a great point. At this year, we now have the opportunity to think ahead on these issues. Last year, we got caught, in the immediacy of the pandemic. So this year, I think that's a great point to make, that we should all be considering some of those options. Whether we have to utilize them or not will be another issue, but I think that's a great point at this time. And I think it's a message that goes out there to the business community in that we're not just sitting on our laurels waiting for something else to happen that will help us drive a decision. We're actually being more proactive and more planning for the coming days. So,
Yeah, Mr.
Commissioner
Chair.
Franzine.
I believe that even if the businesses are open, they've suffered significant losses, and we should maybe think about doing that just to try to help, because they're not going to be back to, even if they're open, they're not going to be back and not have regained a lot of what they've lost. So I think it's really important that we look at that.
I think that's a point to think about too, is their kind of mental status at this point, and if they, first of all, hear that we're at least considering that, but then if we do take action in short order, they will see that we are actually caring about them and getting them through, even though the benefit might not come until June or July if we delay the abatements and that. So I think that's a positive for those. I mean, the damage done to them mentally over the course of this time has been significant, and I think that we're sort of in the business of helping them get healthy again from a mental perspective rather than from the business perspective, although it's both. But, there is something about knowing that we're all in this game together, and we're not just sitting here collecting taxes and forcing them to swallow whatever we decide to do. So I think there is a advantage to that. Commissioner Coring.
Just another subject, I guess I want to, since we've got all kinds of time, and Teresa said
Oh,
that
here
they
till
used-
4:30.
Yeah, Teresa said they used to stay all day long, so I
But
don't
we
see any
have
donuts or
So
cookies.
we can't.
But, Mr. Chairman, I guess I just want to get this off my chest. I had a conversation with Mr. Hool the other day, and we had a long conversation about fees, and I guess I'd like to have us make sure that our fee structure and I'd like to have you address this up here, that our fee structure is set up so that the fee structure kind of covers the cost of our staff to process those, And so when we had our meeting the other night on the ordinance changes and the $100 fee for a camper, for you to have a camper. Well, as you could tell, I was very passionate about that because I thought it was a $100 fee every year. And I thought, that doesn't make any sense. Well, Gary corrected me and let me know nope, that's a one-time $100 fee. But I still think about, okay, so I have a RV and I have it parked in my driveway and maybe I have it hooked up to the electricity and apparently I have to have a permit. Does it really cost $100 for us to process that permit? And then it goes on to the thing that I'm opposed to is the VRVO, because I have had a constituent call and he did want the list of, he wanted the reasoning behind the fee and what he's going to get for the fee. And remember, I asked for a one-page sheet of why this is and what you get and what you're doing. And I'm just wondering, if it's a $200 to $500 scale, is that what the staff costs or what costs have we got into it? I just want to make sure that we're not overcharging on, and you've talked about the sin tax, where these other ones, we can put those higher. Maybe you can kind of explain the conversation that we were having, and I want to just make sure that we're not overcharging. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chair, I do want to return, if I may, to the property tax, and then I'm going to get there, okay? I do think spring makes more sense, and think about our community. When you're coming out of the summer, October taxes, you're much better positioned in our community than when you're coming into May. And so if we're going to think about that, I think we could think about it for first half taxes due. The caveat here is we also have to be careful that we don't impair our own cash flow or the cash flow associated with cities, schools, and towns. And so if it pleased the board, what I would propose is I'll take this feedback back to staff and we'll start to research this. And the parameters that you put on who's eligible is really important. Last time you said they had to be a business that was closed by executive order of the governor. You see how that puts a limit on who's going to apply. The broader you throw that open to say any business that's suffering or particular kinds of businesses, the bigger that number gets, the greater the risk is that we're going to impair the cash flow. And so it's this balance between trying to help someone make sure they don't lose their business against us making sure we can meet the requirements of our own. It's a delicate balance, but if that please the board, that's what I'll do is I'll just have staff go back and we'll start to collect some information and we'll bring more to you. That's okay?
Members comfortable with that? Yep.
Then to Commissioner Coring's point, generally speaking, we can only charge for fees that which is our cost of doing it. Now, that's not as simple as just the hourly rate for the employee. We also put benefits in there. We can count overhead costs in there. We can count the cost of the copy machine, all of the things. And so a $100 fee, it's less than 2 hours worth of staff time. It's not that the staff person got paid $50 an hour. It's that the staff person's wage plus their benefits plus the overhead. So you don't get much time for $100 these days. There are certain fees which we have the capacity to set higher than what state law. It tends to be things like a liquor license, a tobacco license, and sometimes those are referred to as sin taxes, that you will generate taxes based on behaviors that people might not think are the smartest. All told, once every 3 years, we take a deep dive into asking this question. I don't believe this year was a deep dive. I think next year.
This year.
This year was. Oh, this year was? Okay, cool. So what we do in that deep dive is, what is the cost of providing that service? And none of it's free. Your only choice here is you're either going to charge a fee to cover the cost of the service, or you're going to tax the general public to cover the cost of the service. There's no free lunch. And so generally speaking, what I would tell you is, where you can identify who is the beneficiary of the service and they have an ability to pay, it is a good candidate for a fee. And then you should be thinking about it in terms of what's the benefit to the individual versus what's the generalized benefit to society? I'll give you an example. Planning and zoning. I'm going to build a garage. There is a specific benefit to me in making sure that I have done so in conformance with all of the rules. My neighbors are going to, separate all of that stuff, right? And so we charge most of that to the individual. But there is also a generalized benefit to having orderly planning and zoning to everybody, even if you're not applying for a permit. And so think about that cost of delivery of service. What percent of it do you want to be recovered through fee, and what percent of it do you want to be recovering through ad valorem tax? And it varies from every function to every function. Every fee is different. Planning and zoning, we tend to say it's heavily weighted towards the individual. If we get into other fees, it might not be. And so we can't charge more than it costs us. There is a debate over who should pay the cost, and every 3 years, we try to take a deep dive into that. And so I think Nick probably would be prepared to answer any questions that you might have about what the outcome of that was. I wasn't as involved this year as they were, but it is a process that we initiated about 3 years ago.
Commissioner Franzine.
Mr. Chair, I have talked to Gary over in Land Services. I've talked to a couple of the people on planning and zoning. And from what I understand, the fee a lot of times does not even cover what is done, because not only do they have, the staff that goes out and looks at things, they also have on-sites by the Planning and Zoning Board, and then they have meetings where we pay for the Planning and Zoning Board, and those all have to be figured into the fees too. So eventually, on bigger projects, the fees don't come close to covering what's been done.
And I know we had an increase last year to those dollars that we paid to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Were those considered in the fee schedule? Nick?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, when we look at the fees, there's another aspect that we include in this, and that's our comparability to the surrounding counties. We try to keep our fees within a relative range of how everybody else is, so we're not overcharging somebody to live in Crow Wing County, but we're not undercharging either.
Have you ever compared our fees to Baxter's?
You're a pool of people, just remember that, folks.
Staff does look at multiple different areas. I don't know if Baxter is one of those they're comparing to or not, but they do look at multiple areas when they do that. They do go in, they cost, and then it is a decision. And we present the fee schedules to you. Last budget committee meeting is when we presented those fees with the recommended changes that staff has. They try to anticipate cost growth and other things that are going to play into that. So we do that every 3 years, a deep dive, but all the other years that are not the deep dive, the staff is still asked to look into what are our costs to deliver this. Are we in line with where we should be?
Very good. Mr. Bray, you would like to give us an update on the local option sales tax?
Yes, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, as the committee meeting was going on here, we had gotten our final payment from the Department of Revenue for our 2020 local option sales tax. And I just want to report that we did overperform our budget revenue projections. And it looks like right now we're going to do a little bit more analysis by at least 200,000. So for whatever reason, being a shifting to online sales or some other things, our local option sales tax, which is so important to us in our roadways here, has performed well and actually overperformed this year. So I thought it was appropriate during Budget Committee to give that final report here because I got the final notice just 15 minutes ago.
Excellent. Nick, can you tell us what the original budget amount was?
Let me see here.
I have that.
Go ahead, Tim.
It was 7,125,000 is what our projected revenues from Lost were.
And we came in at
And we-
just 7.3?
Yes, something.
7.474.
I believe.
Did you hear that, Tim?
No,
7.474 is what it came in at?
I'm very close to that. I'm sure his analysis is much deeper than mine, but
Well, the question for you, Tim, is you said 200,000, there's 300,000 difference. Where's that other 100,000 going?
I apologize, it's 7.401.
741?
The state gives multiple columns of different totals, and I forgot the reduced cost for, or their fee that they charge us. Yep, 7.4 million.
okay, I have 7.401638.
Yep.
That's, so. It's going to the roads, Mr. Chair.
It's very interesting that in this year, we overperform, when I think we were all expecting us to underperform. So that's, I think, makes us all very happy. It would be interesting to figure out why we did overperform, but apparently the people that came spent a lot of money. And I think that's the overriding message, whether it was fewer people spending more or more people just in general and spending what they would normally spend. So I guess we should thank all the tourists and the locals.
All of the
because we all
RV
purchased
sales, and just think what that does to our, times 100.
It was interesting, I ran across an article that I shared with Tim Hool and a few others, that the overperformance of local sales tax is not unique to our portion of Minnesota or even the country. The article was based on a similar place, tourist type area in upstate New York, and then a couple others around in Michigan. And so they were also seeing pockets of overperformance. And so we are not unique here. So something is going on. It'd be nice to see exactly what the reasoning is behind that.
Well, perhaps that some of the stimulus money that was sent out to individuals and families and being unemployed at that time has caused them to take more vacation time, and perhaps that would be one of the factors in it. But I think we should be excited about this. I think we should also be cautious that we need to keep our lakes and up north look, trees and such as pristine as possible, so that these people find us to be the place they want to come to. Administrator Hool?
Mr. Chair, members, I don't want to cut that conversation off, so if you want to continue that, I'm happy to wait.
I think we were done.
I'm going to try to give you just a very quick and brief update of the Economic Assistance Grant Program that's being discussed in St. Paul. 3 buckets. The first one, the one they want to get out the door the fastest, would be for restaurants, breweries, bowling alleys, bars, gyms, and different iterations. They use industry codes to figure out who is which one. And DOR, the Department of Revenue, that's $100 million. They would send those grants out the door. They have different grant amounts. Business that does not participate in the unemployment program would be eligible for up to 10,000, 0 to 20 employees, 15,000. As the business gets larger, they'd be eligible for a larger DOR grant. Those grants I would expect to just go out the door directly from the state. I doubt there's an application process, but I think their goal is quick.
No county input.
No county input, nothing for us to do. The second bucket, they also labeled this fast, and so it doesn't say counties and it doesn't say DOR, but I think it means DOR. Large convention centers, movie theaters, businesses that experience declines in sales of 30% or more. And then there's amounts listed for those, but they're not huge amounts. 5 million for convention centers with a capacity of 1,500 or more, movie theaters, 9 million divided by the number of screens you have. And so that's not going to get real far across the state of Minnesota. The third bucket, which is the county bucket, 102.5 million. There's a formula that they would send, $17.30 per capita, minimum of 200,000. 25 counties are so small, they will get the 200,000, we're not. And so 1730 per capita for us is about 1.1 million that we would have to work with. We would have a timeline for disbursement through March 15th, so that's good, that gives us time. All unspent funds have to go back to the general fund by April 1st. It is as flexible as possible, so it is not limited to businesses that were directly impacted by the executive order. There's no revenue loss requirement, no minimums, maximums that we could establish. We can work with a nonprofit to review the applications. And then there's some things, businesses got to be located within the county, but don't have to necessarily have brick and mortar. The funds must be used to cover costs due to COVID pandemic, and they are saying the auditing piece will be minimal. It remains to be seen what the law will actually say in that regard, so I would pay close attention to that. The grants will also be seen as taxable income. If this passes, which I would think there's a reasonable likelihood, then we're going to need to consider. And so I would ask you to think about, who are those folks in our community that are that next tier hurting? 1.1 million won't get too far, but it can make a difference. And so I'll start thinking about that, but I really would love to get feedback from you guys about where you think the greatest needs are in the community, because that's where we ought to target these funds, in my estimation.
So Administrator Houle, you did say that it would be taxable though, correct?
Yes.
Okay, because that's a huge issue. You know, the PPP thing is coming back with the IRS now ruling that those dollars are taxable when that was not known when those businesses applied for those grants.
Right.
So it's kind of a take the money and then get slapped for taking it after the fact, and that's unfortunate.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, that was also for our grants as well. Those were taxable dollars to the for-profits.
Did we make that known?
I'm not sure we
We're
knew
not
it.
made aware of that until late in the process, after all the approval process was completed, before it was made aware or made known to us that the IRS was going to deem that as taxable. We did contact every one of them. They did send in their W-9s, so we have their tax information, and nobody declined it based on that.
It's discouraging when the government, federal government, comes back after the fact with these kind of rulings. And because it impacts whether they make the decision to accept the money or not to accept it, so.
The ruling on the PPP was the time when we all became aware of all of these programs. It wasn't just PPP. And so that is when we learned that our CARES Act grants were taxable income as well. Keep in mind, it's not taxable income if it is to purchase a good or service. And so the money we spent on broadband, they'll have to pay tax on the goods and services they buy in order to do the project, but the 1.5 million is not taxable, all 1.5 million. The other thing, keep in mind, is any of the grants we gave to nonprofits. Nonprofits don't pay taxes, and so it's not taxable for them. So it's in that narrow, the for-profit grants that we gave out is taxable.
Is the YMCA a nonprofit?
YMCA is a nonprofit. That would be non-taxable. All the schools, all the money that we gave to schools, nonprofits, non-taxable, not an issue.
Commissioner Coring.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm glad your name's on the check, so that's a good. Is there anybody that's able to give a report, or does anybody know how things turned out on the sending out of the proposed valuation and the sheets that just went out like a month ago? Or does anybody know? I know in the past we had an issue up in unorganized territory and we had to resend out some. Did everything go good? I know I heard from about 100 people, and no, I never heard from not one person. So I'm just wondering if anybody heard, or anybody, how did that all, did everything go good? It must have went good, because I never heard from anybody. As far as we know. Okay, perfect. Anybody else get any calls?
Nope. I
No, would
didn't.
you like a call from me?
No.
Mine in Baxter went way up.
Well, of
But mine in
course.
Center Township went down.
Yeah.
I've only received 2 calls,
Oh,
so it's pretty
okay.
light.
Okay.
Any other business? Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.
Thank you.